I'd like to first say a special welcome to some of our good friends and guests. First of all, His Excellency the High Commissioner of the Republic of Cyprus, Dr. Kyriakos Kouros, High Commissioner. The Archbishop unfortunately could not be with us, but we have with us the Bishop General of the Archdiocese, Father Constantino. Father Constantino, welcome. And we also have Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Baroness, welcome. I'm expecting 2 members of Parliament. Hopefully they will turn up. Bambos Haralambos of Southgate and Wood Green, and David Pinto Duchinsky of Hendon, a new Labour, both Labour candidates who won in the recent elections. And David Pinto actually won only with 15 votes. 15 votes. It was that close. President of the National Federation of Cypriots, Christos Karaoulis, and presidents of all the refugee associations here tonight, distinguished friends of Cyprus, fellow compatriots. Welcome to our annual seminar that marks the Turkish invasions and illegal occupation dedicated to our founder of Lobby For Cyprus, Kyriakos Christodoulou. Kyriakos, who came from the village of Aios Ambrosios, was one of the many forcibly displaced from the occupied north. Lobby For Cyprus was formed to campaign for the cause of those which were forcibly displaced to return to their homes, towns, and villages. Today's seminar marks the passage of 50 years since Turkey invaded the Republic of Cyprus, occupied its northern area, and forcibly displaced thousands of its citizens amid a climate of impunity that continues to this day. The speakers tonight will examine the inalienable right of the Cypriot refugees and the internally displaced to return and reclaim their homes and lands. Ladies and gentlemen, Lobby For Cyprus will continue its struggle for as long as the northern area of the Republic of Cyprus remains under Turkish occupation. I would now like to welcome on the podium His Excellency, the High Commissioner of the Republic of Cyprus.
Good evening, everybody, distinguished guests, fellow Cypriots, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cyprus House. I'm very glad that we are offering the space to the Lobby of Cyprus for their seminar, The Displaced Perspectives on the Right to Return. And allow me to take the opportunity to congratulate them for the initiative and for their struggle all this period on the perspective issue of the displaced persons. I would like to especially thank the distinguished speakers and panelists who participate, both physically and virtually, from what I have been informed, to share their insights and expertise. Your contribution underscores the international dimension of our struggle for justice and human rights. The seminar marks an extremely sad milestone, the passage of 50 years since the invasion of Cyprus by Turkey, following a coup staged by Greek dictators without any democratic legitimacy and their puppet militias on the island against the then democratically elected president of Cyprus. We are here to reflect on the profound impact of that events and mostly of the invasion and the continuous occupation on our island, and to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the inalienable right to displaced Cypriots to return to their properties, their ancestral homes and lands, and enjoy the full spectrum of their human rights, of our human rights. The invasion, which Turkey has the audacity to describe as peace operation, was not just a tragic event in the contemporary history of the Republic of Cyprus. It was a profound violation of the fundamental principles of international law, human rights, and humanitarian norms. over 170,000 members of the Greek Cypriot community, in essence 1 in 3 Greek Cypriots, and the majority of the Turkish Cypriot community were forcibly or coercively displaced from their homes, deprived of their properties, uprooted from their social, cultural, and economic fabric of their cities and communities. They found themselves without adequate resources, facing the immediate challenge of survival and adaptation to life as refugees in their own countries. For half a century, the Greek Cypriots have lived with the hope and the pain of returning to the places where their roots lie, while the Turkish Cypriots have lived with the worry of another uprooting ever since. It is fair to say that the displaced were the ones who were most affected by the consequences of invasion and occupation. A great number of those, thousands, found refuge in countries all over the world, including the United Kingdom. I believe that some of those are present here tonight. Under international law, specifically under the frameworks of human rights law and humanitarian law, the right to return to one's home and reclaim one's property is recognized as a fundamental right. The principle of the right to return has been upheld by numerous international conventions and resolutions, including those of the United Nations. Having this in mind, the aspect of the return of the refugees and displaced back to their homes lies in the core of any resolution on the Cyprus issue, and it cannot be decoupled or handled independently. Alongside with the issues of governance, properties, securities and guarantees, the issue of the displaced and their right of return needs to be tackled in a manner that will create the conditions of a just and viable solution. This is at the forefront of all previous and current governments of the Republic of Cyprus. We seek through negotiations, peaceful negotiations, to achieve this solution of the Cyprus issue, always on the basis of the agreed United Nations framework of a bizonal, bicommunal federation, and aligned with the EU acquis and international legality. A solution that will end the occupation and render the Republic of Cyprus a normal functional state without anachronistic guarantee systems and occupying troops, laying the foundation of peaceful coexistence, mutual understanding, prosperity for all. Dear esteemed audience, this seminar aims to shed light on the ongoing injustices faced by our displaced compatriots and to delve into these complex issues, examining the legal, humanitarian and practical aspects of the right to return. The deliberations will explore the obligations of the international community, the role of legal frameworks, and the measures needed to ensure the rights of the displaced are recognized and restored. We, today, reaffirm our collective commitment to advocating, among others, for the rights of those who have been forcibly displaced. Let us work together with determination and solidarity to ensure that justice prevails and that the right to return is not just a distant hope, but a tangible reality for every displaced Cypriot. Thank you for being here today.
I'd like to call now Father Konstantinos on behalf of the Archbishop Nikitas. Thank you.
Just a small correction. I'm not a bishop general, I'm a vicar general on behalf of the Archdiocese. Unfortunately, the Archbishop couldn't be here today because, as you know, he received the invitation a bit too late and he had already other engagements to attend to. So I'm here on his behalf to welcome, first of all, His Excellency, the High Commissioner and Ambassador to this country, and to assure him that the Archdiocese is open to you, and I'm sure you will cooperate with the Archbishop on very good terms, because he's a man of understanding of many issues. Lady Baroness, MPs, whether here or absent, distinguished guests, I would like to express the Archbishop's wishes, blessings, and wishes for a successful seminar. I'm not going to make any more speeches. I think we'll have to hear from the distinguished speakers, and we have a summary of everything from His Excellency. So I'll wish you a good seminar, and just to say that even though I'm not a refugee, I've lost my village, I've lost my house, I've lost my land, and these things affects all of us. And those who haven't lost anything, we are all Cypriots, and I think we all care for a just solution to the displaced persons especially. And not to forget, I will end by quoting something from the Holy Book. Do not put your trust in the mighty of this world, but in God, because the mighty of this world will always say one thing and do another, unfortunately. But we try as much as we can, politically, socially, in all aspects we can, but in the end, we are all in the hands of God, and He's the only one who can give us a just solution if we trust Him and ask for His help. Amen.
Next, we have our international speakers, and we have from the United States of America, Canada, Australia, and also from Greece, Athens. We'll try to connect with one of the individuals who I don't think anyone needs to introduce him, one of the most prominent singers and one of the most record producers and musicians, but also he served as Deputy Minister for Culture under President Christodoulidis, Michalis Hadjiannis.
Good evening, London. Firstly, allow me to express my apologies for not turning on my camera and not having the chance for a face-to-face interaction. I have been dealing since this morning with a difficult flu, and I felt it was best to participate in this way than cancelling. So, as I say, good evening, London. Good evening, fellow co-citizens, compatriots. Your Excellency, the High Commissioner Dr. Kyriakos Kouros, Bishop Iakovos of Kladiopoleos, Baroness Richardson of Wittenborn, Ambassador for the Diaspora Theodora Konstantinidou, Pambos Karalambous, Member of Parliament, distinguished members of the diaspora from Australia, Canada, and the United States, panel speakers, President of the National Federation of Cypriots in the UK, Christos Karaolis, fellow compatriots and friends of Cyprus, members of Lobby For Cyprus. Thank you, Theodore, for the kind invitation to participate in the Lobby for Cyprus seminar, marking 50 years since the two Turkish invasions and occupation of our beloved island of Cyprus in 1974. As the son of a forcibly displaced family, I have deep feelings for all the refugees in Cyprus and the diaspora whose rights must not be forgotten. We have been forcibly displaced from our villages, towns, our homes, and our lands, our historic sites such as those in Kyrenia, where I come from, Amohostos, Karpasia, Morphou, just to name a few. 50 long years have passed since approximately 180,000 Cypriots were forcibly displaced by Turkey. 50 years on, and it is difficult to see light at the end of the tunnel. The leader of the pseudo-state Tatar, with the full support, guidance, and instructions from Turkey, and of course, with the blessing of Erdogan, has no intention of allowing the United Nations Secretary General's personal envoy for Cyprus, Maria Angela Hogin, to find common ground in order to commence talks to seek a viable settlement. I'm deeply saddened that my grandparents didn't have the chance to see, just for the last time, their home, their land in which they were born, raised, and grown up. Even our parents may not be able to return back home, which is very possible. as you understand, because time flies. I welcome the seminar organized by Lobby for Cyprus, as it will highlight the so many injustices we, the forcibly displaced, the refugees, had and are still facing after so many years away from our ancestral homes. We will never give up our right to return. That's a fact. I was only recently made aware by Theodoros and his colleagues at Lobby for Cyprus that the forcibly displaced, the uprooted, the refugees in diaspora are denied the right to vote in a future referendum that could determine the future of their own homeland. A referendum that will determine who will occupy and live in my family's village, our home, who will own our land churches. We, the forcibly displaced, the refugees in diaspora, call for those in the diaspora to not be denied the same rights that every citizen living in Cyprus has to vote in a future referendum. Lobby for Cyprus is championing the right to vote, and I hereby fully support them. Μπράβο σε όλους. Και στην προσπάθεια του Lobby for Cyprus. I just speaking to Greek.
Ναι, Μιχάλη, έχεις κανέναν τελευταίο θες να μας πεις?
I will carry this message to Cyprus and convey it to President Mr. Nikos Christodoulidis, with whom Lobby for Cyprus has met and are in discussion with the President and Ambassador Christodoulidou. My compatriots in London and throughout the diaspora, let us unite and demand our fundamental rights. Do not treat us as the forgotten refugees because we will live in the diaspora. It should never be forgotten that however many years pass, we will keep fighting for a free and united Republic of Cyprus. And finally, maybe the issue is not so much about us and our parents. 50 years later, it is only natural for the sake of the younger generations to learn the whole truth as to what happened then. The truth is like a clear sky. It lights the way for all of us. Thank you for the invitation, and I wish you all the best.
I'd like now to for you to put on the video regarding the next speaker, which is Theodora Konstantinidou, who is the Director of the Service of Overseas and Repatriated Cypriots. Unfortunately, she has another engagement, but she sent her message to us.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear compatriots, I extend my warmest greetings to all and congratulations to the Lobby for Cyprus for organizing this timely seminar on the crucial issue of displaced persons' right to return. I am confident the distinguished panelists' informed insights, along with audience participation, will lead to a very productive discussion. The 50th anniversary of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus serves as a sober reminder of one of its most tragic consequences, the forced eviction of nearly 200,000 Cypriots from their homes and Turkey's ongoing defiance of their right to return. Many of these displaced persons now form a significant part of our global diaspora. Please allow me to offer some reflections as a contribution for your discussion to follow. Firstly, the undisputable right of displaced Cypriots to return is firmly established in multiple international legal instruments, as well as on Security Council resolutions and decisions by the European Court of Human Rights. Secondly, the right to return is closely linked to other fundamental human rights and freedoms, such as the right to property, freedom of religion, and freedom of movement. This link must be considered when examining approaches to its application. Turkey's perspective is another aspect to be considered. For 50 years, Turkey has systematically pursued a strategy aiming at creating a de facto situation that, in her view, would render the displaced Cypriots' return non-feasible. These tactics include demographic alteration within the occupied area and the destruction of its cultural and historical identity. However, let me add a personal perspective. As a displaced person myself from Famagusta, I can assure you that no amount of manipulation by Turkey can extinguish my right, my desire, and my unwavering goal to return. This bond with our land and homes is a powerful force that fuels the determination of displaced Cypriots to return, no matter the circumstances. In this regard, the role of education, communal and family engagement in transmitting this bond to younger generations who were not born in the occupied area is crucial. Dear friends, thank you for inviting me to participate in this important seminar. I commend your resilience and vital contribution in keeping our fight for justice at the forefront until the reunification of Cyprus and the return to our homes.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the Member of Parliament for Hendon, David Pinto, who has arrived, but he's only here for 2 minutes and he has to depart. But he said, I have to come and show my face. David, welcome to the House of Cyprus. Let's go on to our next international speaker, which is Nikki Ashton. And Nikki Ashton is a Greek Canadian, a Member of Parliament for Churchill, it's Kiwatinuk Aski in Manitoba. Nikki, are you around? Hello, Nikki.
Yes.
Well.
Hello.
Success. And Nikki is currently in Greece.
Hello, good evening. Καλό σας βράδυ. Χαίρομαι πάρα πολύ που είμαι κοντά σας. Παρόλο που είναι για μια πολύ σοβαρή επέτειο, τα 50 χρόνια της εισβολής της παράνομης από την Τουρκία στην Κύπρο. This week marks the 50th anniversary of the first invasion of Cyprus by Turkey. I'm proud to speak to you today following the passing of a resolution that I introduced that was unanimously passed by the Canadian House of Commons just a few weeks ago in June, where we condemned the invasion and called for unity for Cyprus. And as I begin, I would like to share the language of that resolution that was passed in the House of Commons unanimously a few short weeks ago. That given that 50 years ago, the Republic of Cyprus was invaded by Turkey in July and August 1974, resulting in the illegal occupation of 36% of Cyprus and the displacement of more than 150,000 Cypriots. 2, Canada has condemned the invasion, as has the world community, including the United Nations, through Resolution 360 of the UN Security Council. 3, Canada played a key role as a peacekeeper in Cyprus between 1964 and 1993. This House paid tribute to the 33,000 Canadian soldiers who put their lives on the line and honor the memory of the 28 Canadian soldiers who died during the deployment, including during the invasion. And that this House reiterate its condemnation of the invasion of Cyprus and call on all parties to respect international law and the illegal occupation and act to ensure the reunification of the Republic of Cyprus. I'm proud that the House of Commons of Canada was able to show before we rose this summer that in advance of this dark anniversary that we in Canada stand with Cyprus, that we in Canada honor the veterans, the 33,000 veterans who served in Cyprus, and more importantly, we in Canada stand with Cyprus in calling for reunification and justice at this time. Today I speak of the first invasion because it is important to remember that after the attempted coup against President Makarios by the military junta The junta collapsed, and the Turks invaded Cyprus for a second time in August. They went from occupying 3% of Cyprus to 38% as it is today. Let's be clear that this was an invasion and an occupation. Since 1974, Turkey has stationed tens of thousands of troops in the occupied area. Not only has it denied the right of return of Greek Cypriots that we are talking about here tonight to the occupied area, it has brought in more than 120,000 settlers. We must be clear, this is ethnic cleansing. We must be clear that this violates human rights. And we must be clear that this violates numerous United Nations resolutions and fundamental tenets of international law. Let's be clear, anything less than the reunification of Cyprus with the right of return of all Cypriots to return to their homes, their villages, their communities is unacceptable. Let's also be clear, this didn't just happen. This is a legacy of colonialism, of the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire, of decades before the independence, of the repression of those seeking self-determination of Cyprus. If there has been any doubt about what is happening in Cyprus, one only has to look at the events of the last few years. The deliberate provocations by Erdogan, the continued move to open Varosha in violation of United Nations resolutions, the building of a so-called government building for the illegal entity occupying northern Cyprus that is only recognized by Turkey, and fundamentally the statement by Erdogan and others rejecting any peace settlement based on a single united Cyprus. It's important to note that many Turkish Cypriots do not share the view put forward by Erdogan. Many progressive Turkish Cypriots refuse to be part of this provocation. Cypriots have been clear. They want to be united. They want the same human rights that other Europeans and other world citizens have and deserve. But let's also be clear that what is happening in Cyprus now is a continuing part of an agenda, the agenda of Erdogan's Turkish government that is a growing threat to the human rights of many, including its own citizens, and more importantly, a threat to the peace and stability of the region. Let's look at what's been happening. The targeting and purging of many people following the attempted coup 8 years ago that had nothing to do with what was stated at the time. The repression of the press, the targeting of opposition parties and politicians, the continuing oppression of the Kurdish people, the move to take Turkey out of the Istanbul Convention on the Rights of Women, the denial of the Armenian and Pontian genocide, the move to use Hagia Sophia for their religious agenda, and the threats to overturn the Treaty of Lausanne that established the current borders between Turkey and Greece, the attacks on the territorial waters and integrity of Greece time after time. Yes, many of these actions have been criticized by international organizations, by the European Union, by individual countries. But where are the consequences? The clear statement that this is unacceptable and that there will be consequences and that relations with this government and Turkey will be impacted. The reality is that all too often European countries have been two-faced, criticizing violations of international law and human rights, but continuing to pursue their own narrow national interests, including selling arms to Turkey. I am concerned that my own country, Canada, which has a history of being part of building peace in Cyprus, including as peacekeepers at the time of the invasion, has said little or nothing about what is happening with respect to Turkey's aggression and failure to work towards peace and justice. That is why I worked recently with my colleagues, including Greek Canadian parliamentarians, across party lines to achieve the passage of the unanimous resolution on the invasion and the need to reunify Cyprus that I shared a few moments ago. We must recognize that Cypriots of all backgrounds deserve the right to come together to build a better future. I have been to Cyprus. I've ridden to the Green Line, first with my family and in recent years officially as. But it's important to share that my vision and our vision is not simply based on that connection of my family, of my identity. I've had the opportunity as well to visit and spend time in Turkey. I actually spent some time studying Turkish and connected with Turkish people. This is not about Greeks versus Turks. There are many people in Turkey and occupied Cyprus that reject the regressive agenda that has oppressed the people of Cyprus for so long. There is a model, and I draw on my roots here in northern Greece, in Thrace, where for more than 100 years, the minority Muslim population has worked and lived side by the Greek majority population as part of Greece, where religious rights and education rights are respected. In fact, my papu was a teacher of Greek in the Turkish schools many years ago. Today, we need to send a clear message. We are with the people of Cyprus. We condemn the illegal occupation, the illegal invasion. We condemn the reality of injustice that exists today. We have not forgotten the invasion and the occupation of Cyprus. And today we also made clear the need for the displaced, for refugees to have the right to return, the right to vote in favor of a plan for justice that has at its core the right to return. Tonight, we make clear that we will not stop until Cyprus is reunited, when the Green Line is no more, and all the people of Cyprus can return to their homes, to their lands, and can live in peace and prosperity, side by side, setting an example for the world of peace and reconciliation. Thank you. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and have a wonderful summer break in lovely Greece. Thank you. Next is a very good friend of ours, and a very good friend of mine, Mr. Philip Christopher.
First of all, I want to thank the previous speaker, the Parliamentarian from Canada, for beautiful words, and congratulate her on the resolution that she introduced in the Canadian Parliament, and it was very successful in passing unanimously. I wanted to say today that this is July 20th coming. We're approaching July 20th on Saturday, and we will have a protest in New York. That this is a very sad day for all of us. It is indeed a day that no one believed that 50 years would have elapsed without a solution to the Cyprus problem. We are often told by elected officials here in the United States, and I'm sure in Great Britain as well, and we're often told by the State Department and the Foreign Office, that in reality there is no allies or enemies, there's basic interests. And for the past 50 years, we have been fighting and fighting together across the world. As Greek Cypriots, as Hellenes, we have been fighting for the cause of the Cypriot people for freedom and justice. It is unbelievable that after 50 years, not a single refugee has returned to its ancestral home, not a single inch of land has been returned. I'm one of those that believe that Turkey, when they invaded Cyprus, their objective was not only to occupy 37%, but their objective was to take all of Cyprus. I also believe that these past negotiations that we have wasted almost 50 years in negotiating for a solution was basically a waste of time. I think all of us knew from the beginning that Turkey was not ready to compromise and not ready to enter real negotiations. In fact, as Mr. Erdogan will be visiting Cyprus to celebrate the conquest of 37% of the island of Cyprus, a conquest that I call the first Muslim fundamentalist conquest of his agenda. We are looking now today, and hopefully that the basic interest of the United States of America, the basic interest of the UK, the basic interest of Europe would somehow coincide closer to Greece and Cyprus than Turkey. We all must recognize that Turkey is a country of 85 million people. It has become an economic power. It has become a military power. And it's a country that wields power and economic interest. It has a geographic and geopolitical position between Iran, Russia. It's active in the Ukraine, a member of NATO with the largest NATO army. So where do we go from here, and how do we pressure Turkey to compromise in any way? In 1983, in November of 1983, Turkey made it very clear with a unilateral declaration of the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, TRNC. And even though not a single country other than Turkey has recognized this entity, it is indeed an entity that stands there, and the intention and the objective of Turkey is to have a two-state solution. A two-state solution meaning two independent countries, and that would be the way Turkey enters the European Union somehow. And this is what is happening today. As we approach our conference in Cyprus, I will be once again advocating that the Republic of Cyprus forgets about these negotiations, puts forward a plan of action towards a solution, a plan that will call upon the world to recognize the invasion and continued occupation of Cyprus, a plan of action that will demand the withdrawal of the Turkish troops from the island, and the ability to have a solution, a viable solution, that will be accepted by both Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. We must recognize that in the occupied area today, there's more than 500,000 people. The settlers or the illegals have the advantage. And people like Mr. Tatar is a puppet of Mr. Erdogan. The true Turkish Cypriots that yearn for a solution, they're afraid to talk. They're afraid to openly discuss. They're afraid to vote. And they're outnumbered by the Turkish settlers. I wish there was a way for the Turkish Cypriots to join our efforts, actively join our efforts. Prior to 2004, when they were demonstrating before the Republic of Cyprus entering the European Union, we were in contact and we were helping the Turkish Cypriots to stand up against the occupation. Today, we must also recognize that a big percentage of the Turkish Cypriots that have received the passports, approximately 120,000 of them, and they are regarded European citizens. Those Turkish Cypriots that have their medical and their social security and all the benefits that the Republic of Cyprus provides, they may not be as anxious as they were prior to 2004 to join our efforts on behalf of the total population of Cyprus. The Cyprus of 2024 is not the Cyprus of 1974. It is a country, a cosmopolitan country, member of the European Union. We have 60,000 Russians. We have British citizens. We have American citizens. We even have Chinese citizens that live in Cyprus. The Republic of Cyprus is not a bi-communal problem any longer. It was never a bi-communal problem. It was the pretext of Turkey, much the same way that Russia used the pretext on Ukraine to protect the so-called minority and illegally invade the Republic of Cyprus. Today, we must move forward with a plan that the Republic of Cyprus and the people of Cyprus must put forward. I have often spoken about the American federal government. Nicosia could be Washington, D.C. Virginia in the south could be the Greek state. And of course, Maryland in the north could be the Turkish state. Nobody prevents citizens of Virginia going to Maryland, doing business in Maryland, voting in Maryland, and running for office in Maryland. It's a federal government where the states have their powers, but the federal government provides the immigration powers, which is so important. We must recognize that Turkey has a plan. The plan is to flood the occupied area with migrants. It is not a coincidence that all the migrants that are coming into the occupied area are Muslims, and from the occupied area, they're filtered into the Republic of Cyprus. It is unbelievable that a country of 750,000 people has 70,000 illegal migrants that have crossed into the Republic of Cyprus. We have a major danger in Cyprus, and those migrants, I hate to say it, those illegal migrants are receiving more benefits than the refugees of Cyprus, particularly the refugees of diaspora. And that's why I have joined this call today, because your objective is to make sure that refugees have a vote in any solution to the Cyprus problem. I want to congratulate the Lobby of Cyprus for their work that they have done over the years. We have been monitoring and watching your situation and your efforts. I am happy to say that SECA has excellent relationships with everyone at Lobby for Cyprus. And it is my hope that as we move forward after July 20th, that a new plan of action on a world basis will be put forward, that we can support, that we can endorse, and that we can advocate with our governments to support it as well. One thing for sure, the Republic of Cyprus today enjoys excellent relationships with the United States of America, because I'm a believer that the United States of America is the country that can put the pressure on Turkey. There is no question that the Biden administration has been a total disappointment so far. Although they have done some positive things, they have refused to really put the pressure on Turkey. And the truth is that they compromised with Turkey in regards to the F-16s, in regards to allowing Sweden to enter NATO with exchanges. Greece has benefited from this, and Greece has benefited in a tremendous way. Unfortunately, Cyprus did not get the attention that it needed. It is my hope that as we move forward, and as the interest of the United States of America and the interest of Europe in the Eastern Mediterranean region will coincide very closely with Greece and Cyprus, and that would allow us to really put the pressure on the removal of the Turkish troops, the return of the refugees to their homes, and to have one united Cyprus where all Cypriots can enjoy the same rights that we enjoy in our countries. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Before we proceed with the panel speakers, I would like to invite the chairman of Ekdη, the Federation of Cypriot Refugee Associations, which works closely with Lobby for Cyprus. Leonidas, a refugee from Ios Theodoros in the occupied Kyrenia Peninsula, returned to Cyprus after his studies abroad and fought as a reservist against the advancing Turkish army during the first invasion, and at Ios and Domedios, Nicosia, during the second invasion. Leonidas.
Dear friends, let me congratulate firstly the Lobby for Cyprus for this event. Turkey's plans in 1974 were and still are: one, to partition Cyprus by occupying its northern part, to effect ethnic cleansing, prevent the return of the refugees to their homes, and exploit our occupied lands. Second, to break down our communities' cohesion, to destroy and erase evidence of our history, and to legitimize their illegal regime. To counteract these unlawful plans, we expose their attempt to change the demographic character of the occupied part by bringing in illegal settlers and effecting ethnic cleansing. We founded organizations and associations whose members have a common desire to return to their place of origin in the occupied Cyprus. We recorded in books and documentaries our local history, our customs and traditions, our way of life, our toponymy. We organized exhibitions, concerts, and other musical and literary events. To counteract their attempts of recognition of the illegal puppet regime, we work to create political opposition by enlightening parliamentarians and local leaders. We arrange events in the House of Commons and elsewhere, expose the Turkish aggression, expansionist plans, and violation of human rights. We organize demonstrations, marches, assemblies, and public gatherings demanding the removal of the Turkish occupying troops and the illegal settlers, and the right of the refugees to return to their homes. We realize that if we were to make a difference here in the UK, we had to gain the support of our politicians. Tom Cox, Eddie O'Hara, Alan Milne, Sergio Rossi, Andy Love, John Marshall, Anthony Coombs, Michael Portillo, Stephen Twigg, Barbara Roche, Ian Twin, Gerald Kaufman, Cyril Townsend, Michael Chapman, Rudy Weiss, Roger Dale, and Teresa Villiers were among those fighting our cause. In Europe, we work with Pauline Green and Alf Lomas. Always present in these events was the legendary Baroness Lina Jäger, a committed supporter of our cause from 1954 to 2007, when she died. Many of those I mentioned have since passed away, but they all deserve our eternal gratitude and appreciation. Despite our joint efforts in Cyprus, in Greece, in the United States, in the UK and in Europe and elsewhere, thus far we did not achieve our goals. Although we kept the issue alive for decades, Turkey keeps the occupied Cyprus under her thumb, maintains and reinforces her army of occupation on the island, exploits our land, and fully controls the puppet regime. Her aggressive and expansionist plans are in full action with no sign on any desire for a viable solution. Kissinger in 1974 said that pressure diplomacy does not yield results with Turkey. Time has shown that only pressure works with Turkey. An original ex-politician, our neighbor, she said recently, if you offer the Turks your finger, they will take your hand. And if you offer them your hand, they will cut off your arm. Under these realities and these circumstances, we have no other option but to continue our struggle with more vigor by enlisting the support and the involvement of our new generations. We owe it to those that gave their lives, to those still missing, and to those who died without realizing their dream to return to their occupied lands. As far as I'm concerned, I owe it to my 8 combatants who fell fighting the advancing Turkish army west of Kuchovendis and east of Sikhari between July 20th and 22nd, and whom we buried without church service and eulogies, with bare hands, with rocks and stones, in the slopes of Pentadactylos, and who to this day are on the list of the missing. This is not just an issue of the 180,000 refugees. It is not just an issue of the 1 million Cypriots. This is an issue of gross violation of human rights that affects every human being on our planet. For the right to home and property is guaranteed by Article 17.2 of the United Nations Charter for Human Rights. We cannot allow arrogant leaders, dictators, and rogue regimes to attack and occupy small and weak countries, imposing de facto outcomes by the use of force. Otherwise, this world we know and care about will be governed by fear and the rule of the jungle. And for preventing this happening and defending our human rights, we and generations to come have an obligation to continue our struggle. Before finishing this brief address, I wish to raise a crucial issue that has been idle for many years. That is the right of all the refugees in the diaspora to have a vote in a referendum to determine the future of our island. It is inconceivable that even those hardly affected by this invasion have the right to decide the solution of our problem, while many of those directly affected won't have a say in the future of our stolen properties, our land, and our country. Thank you.
We will now move on to the panel speakers. We have 2 panel speakers today, and one's in Cyprus and the other one's in Greece. Dr. Kyriakidis is a former solicitor and now academic senior visiting fellow at the University of Central Lancashire Cyprus campus. And from Nicosia, Dr. Theodora Christou, who is a Londoner but is in Cyprus on holiday and a member of Lobby for Cyprus, is Vice President of Euromed Rights, Convener of International Human Rights Law at London School of Economics, Convener of Transnational Law and Governance at Queen Mary University of London, and a Lobby for Cyprus executive. May I call Mark Stevens, please, to come. Mark is a very well-known human rights lawyer here in the United Kingdom. Mark Stevens, CBE, welcome. Thank you. You'll probably have seen Mark on many occasions on live TV. Baroness, would you like to join us on the panel, please? Yes. Claire, over to you. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, can I first ask whether you can hear me? Yes. I'm very pleased to hear that response. I've entitled my presentation 50 Years of Inhumanity, Impunity and Injustice. I'd like us to go back to first principles in order to find out what has gone wrong, why it has gone wrong, and why what has gone wrong continues to bedevil the present. And I'd like to now step back into history. Following the defeat of Germany at the end of the Second World War, Robert H. Jackson was appointed as the US Chief of Counsel, that is, the Chief Prosecutor, at the International Military Tribunal established in Nuremberg in Germany. Jackson had been temporarily seconded there from the US Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., where he had been serving as an Associate Justice since 1941, having previously been Attorney General at the helm of the US Department of Justice. On the 21st of November 1945, with so much blood baked into the soil of so many parts of Europe and the wider world, Jackson delivered a vigorous opening statement in the first of the 13 post-war trials held in Nuremberg by the victorious Allies. The opening words of the opening statement of Jackson captured the magnitude of the case before the International Military Tribunal. And I will read to you those opening words. May it please your honours, the privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it cannot survive their being repeated. Jackson referred to crimes against the peace, as these formed one of the three pillars upon which the International Military Tribunal had been founded in accordance with Article 6 of its charter, as enshrined in the London Agreement of the 8th of August 1945. The other two pillars were war crimes and crimes against humanity. Before the judges on the bench, Jackson proceeded to present the case for the prosecution against Hermann Goering, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and the other defendants in the dock who had served in the discredited Hitler regime. Jackson cited one invasion after another and one occupation of foreign territory after another. In that latter context, Jackson told the judges that the German occupation forces, controlled or commanded by men on trial before you, committed a long series of outrages against the inhabitants of occupied territory that would be incredible except for captured orders and captured reports which show the fidelity with which those orders were executed. For the most part, the judges were persuaded by the case of the prosecution. Accordingly, they reached a verdict of guilty in relation to almost all of the defendants in that historic first trial at Nuremberg. In their judgment, handed down on the 30th of September 1946, the American, British, and French judges took the opportunity to affirm that, and I quote, "To initiate a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole." In their judgment, the judges paid particular attention to the crimes committed against those who had been forcibly uprooted from their homes. For example, and this is just one example I'm going to give you, in relation to one German-occupied part of France, the judges observed that the population of Alsace were the victims of a German expulsion action. Between July and December 1940, 105,000 Alsatians were either deported from their homes or prevented from returning to them. On the 11th of December 1946, the then new United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 95-1 and thereby affirmed the principles of international law recognized by the Charter of the Nuremberg Tribunal and the judgment of the tribunal itself. Among other legal ripostes to the lawlessness unleashed by the Hitler regime, what followed was the adoption of the four Geneva Conventions on the 12th of August 1949. One of these, was the Fourth Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war. Its provisions left no room for doubt as to the protection which an occupying power must accord to unarmed civilian persons, known as protected persons, in case of any war or occupation. Under Article 1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which, let me stress, is an instrument of international humanitarian law, as distinct from international human rights law. Under Article 1, the high contracting parties, which include Turkey, undertake to respect and to ensure respect for the present convention in all circumstances. Under Article 2.2 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, the convention shall also apply to all cases of partial or total occupation of the territory of a high contracting party, and the Republic of Cyprus is such a party, even if the said occupation meets with no armed resistance. Article 4.1, entitled Definition of Protected Persons, clarifies that persons protected by the Convention are those who at a given moment and in any manner whatsoever find themselves, in case of a conflict or occupation, hands of persons a party to the or occupying power of which they are not nationals. Under Article 27 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, protected persons are entitled, in all circumstances, to respect for their persons, their honour, their family rights, their religious convictions and practices, and their manners and customs. They shall at all times be humanely treated, and shall be protected especially against all acts of violence or threats thereof, and against insults and public curiosity. Article 47 is entitled Inviolability of Rights, and emphasises that protected persons who are in occupied territory shall not be deprived in any case or in any manner whatsoever of the benefits of the present convention by any change introduced as a result of the occupation of a territory into the institutions or government of the said territory, nor by any agreement concluded between the authorities of the occupied territories and the occupying power, nor by any annexation by the latter of the whole or any part of the occupied territory. And now I come to the most important provisions of all, the first and second paragraphs of Article 49. They're important because they are germane to the subject matter of today's seminar. Under Article 49, 1 and 2, individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as deportations of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of the occupying power or to that of any other country, occupied or not, are prohibited regardless of their motive. Nevertheless, the occupying power may undertake total or partial evacuation of a given area if the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. Such evacuations may not involve the displacement of protected persons outside the bounds of the occupied territory, except when, for material reasons, it is impossible to avoid such displacement. Persons thus evacuated shall be transferred back to their homes as soon as hostilities in the area in question have ceased. That is one of the sources of the right to return, which is in the title of today's seminar. For good measure, Article 49.6 adds, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. Let me stress, Turkey ratified the Fourth Geneva Convention in 1949. In 1954, almost 8 years later, in 1962, the Republic of Cyprus acceded to the convention. It follows that when Turkey invaded the Republic of Cyprus for the first time on the 20th of July 1974, in purported response to a coup in Nicosia, Turkey was bound to comply with the principles of international law recognized by the Charter of the Nuremberg Tribunal, the judgment of the Tribunal, and the Fourth Geneva Convention, among other instruments of international law. It also follows that Turkey was likewise bound to comply with all of those instruments and principles I've mentioned when it reinvaded the Republic of Cyprus in a second invasion on the 14th of August 1974 1974, this time without a pretext, because 3 weeks earlier, the short-lived Couist regime in Nicosia had collapsed, as had its puppet master, the military junta in Athens. Despite that framework of international humanitarian law and indeed international human rights law under the European Convention on Human Rights and other instruments, Turkey flagrantly, systematically and shamefully violated its obligations under international law. After invading and reinvading the Republic of Cyprus, Turkey occupied, militarized, ethnically cleansed and colonized 36% of the territory and as much as 57% of the coastline of the Republic of Cyprus. Another percentage or two fell within the UN-controlled buffer zone. Turkey dishonored, inflicted violence against and meted out other forms of inhumane treatment to unarmed civilians who should have been protected under the Fourth Geneva Convention and should have been treated accordingly. So too should prisoners of war under other provisions and instruments of international law. Tens of thousands of people were forcibly evicted from their homes, forcibly transferred away from their towns or villages, and forcibly rendered displaced persons in their own sovereign state. Among them, I should declare relatives of my late grandfathers from the occupied villages of Bedra and Lisi. Thousands were murdered or subjected to enforced disappearances, with many being buried in unmarked graves, contrary to other provisions in the Geneva Conventions. Hundreds were, it appears, raped amid a climate of impunity that prevails to this day. What did the so-called international community do in response? For the most part, it looked the other way. In the United Nations Security Council, the 5 permanent representatives of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council essentially buried their collective heads in the sand. These included the representative of the United Kingdom, Ivor Richard, Queen's Counsel, a barrister who ought to have known better than to form part of a collective failure to uphold the rule of law. What makes this collective failure all the more shocking is that it occurred under the leadership of the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Dr. Kurt Waldheim. In 1972, he had climbed to the pinnacle of global diplomacy as Secretary General after misleading the world about his execrable wartime activities as an Austrian intelligence officer in the armed forces of Hitler's Germany, not least in German-occupied Greece, as the genocide known as the Holocaust was beginning to unfold. There are clear parallels between, on the one hand, the crimes against peace, war crimes and crimes against humanity, for which some of Hitler's henchmen were brought to justice, and on the other hand, the equivalent international crimes ostensibly committed with impunity by Turkey, its armed forces, and its agents, and others of other backgrounds, including, and we must never forget this, the citizens of Greece and the Republic of Cyprus who served in the junta in Athens and in its short-lived puppet regime in Nicosia. Save for chronically few exceptions, they, from Greece, the Republic of Cyprus and Turkey, collectively evaded justice, despite committing, or apparently committing, the most appalling crimes. The exceptions included Nikos Samson, the de facto head of the Couist regime in Nicosia, who was brought to justice in Nicosia in 1976, but so many of his henchmen got away with it. Since the summer of 1974, and indeed since the purported unilateral declaration of independence in the occupied part of the Republic of Cyprus on the 15th of November 1983, the UN Security Council has passed a long string of toothless resolutions, some of which seek to legalize the illegal consequences of criminality by establishing a segregation-based bicommunal, bizonal federation. The United Nations Security Council has consistently failed to authorize any enforcement action under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, as it did after the Iraqi invasion and occupation of Kuwait in 1990. The UN Security Council has failed to authorize the establishment of any international criminal court for Cyprus to deal with all post-1963 international crimes in the way that it did for the former Yugoslavia in 1993. The UN Security Council has failed to impose any sanctions on Turkey in the way that it did, for example, in 1966 against the secessionist regime of Ian Smith in southern Rhodesia, after it had purportedly issued a unilateral declaration of independence. With all this in mind, let me repeat the immortal words of Associate Justice Robert H. Jackson. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it cannot survive their being repeated. Less than 30 years after Jackson uttered these words on the 21st of November 1945, a variation of these wrongs was inflicted in the Republic of Cyprus in the summer of 1974, albeit on a more limited geographical scale and with fewer deaths. Yet, to all intents and purposes, these crimes were, to use Robert Jackson's phrase, ignored, and civilization thereby ran the risk of seeing them repeated. What does civilization find itself confronting today in the summer of 2024? Civilization finds itself confronting the utterly horrific and inhumane consequences of the ongoing post-1967 Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories and the backlash, the ongoing post-2014 Russian occupation of parts of Ukraine, and the ongoing post-2016 Turkish occupation of northern Syria, to name but three ongoing occupations in or near Europe. Among the most horrific of these consequences has been the forcible displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. 50 years ago, in 1974, if civilization had put its foot down, a fresh post-Nuremberg precedent would have been established, and a deterrent may thereby have been established. As it was, an opportunity was missed, and civilization now finds itself on the possible brink of oblivion. It heightened tensions of the Third World War involving nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. And let me just say here that Turkey is having built on its territory a Russian-constructed nuclear power plant. And where is that nuclear power plant located? In Akuyu, which is less than 100 kilometers away from the northern coast of the Republic of Cyprus, and not much further away from the British sovereign territories of Agrodiri and Digelia. I began by quoting from the opening statement of Robert H. Jackson in Nuremberg in 1945. I will end by quoting from his closing arguments of the 26th of July, 1946. So this is what Robert Jackson said. It's common to think of our own time standing at the apex of civilization, from which the deficiencies of preceding ages may patronizingly be viewed in the light of what is assumed to be progress. Reality is that in the long perspective of history, the present century will not hold an admirable position unless its second half is to redeem its first. Alas, as demonstrated by the blood-soaked events of the summer of 1974, the second half of the 20th century did not redeem the first half. More to the point, for the purposes of this seminar, the displaced persons must be treated as victims of unpunished crimes and unpunished cover-ups. Their rights and freedoms must be respected, and they must be restored without any further delay. The time has come, as Robert H. Jackson said on the 26th of July 1946, to redress the blight on the record of our era. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Klerke. Before we go to questions and comments and so forth, I want Theodora, please continue with your presentation, please.
So as Theo did say, I am currently lucky enough to be in Cyprus, but I am a Londoner, but more importantly, a very proud Greek Cypriot. So greetings from Cyprus, where As many of you know, on the 20th of July, the sirens will ring out to mark the first Turkish invasion of the Republic of Cyprus. And as both Glerho and Nikki have both highlighted, there were in fact 2 invasions by Turkey, and the second one more devastating than the first. And this is one fact that I think is important to highlight, because many people are not aware of this or choose to omit it so as to support the pretext that Turkey invaded because of the junta in Athens, which we know by now, 50 years on, was not the real reason behind the Turkish invasion. The second significant fact is that it was Turkey that invaded, and it is Turkey's army which continues to occupy the northern areas of the Republic. So why then at the UN are the talks does our president, the president of the only sovereign nation in Cyprus, demoted to simply the leader of Greek Cypriots only? And why is Turkey not at the table? And instead, as Philip said, its puppet occupation administration is there. How can we progress when the culprit and the occupier is not on the table to find a settlement to the current situation that we find ourselves in? So when it comes to Cyprus, what people who know Cyprus well will realize there's a lot of smoke and mirrors which serve Turkey. I can see Mark there in the room with you, and the last panel that Mark and I were on together was in fact on artificial intelligence. And I make that point because technology can be a great tool if yielded well. Consider, for example, the contribution that technology companies are currently making towards documenting the crimes in the Ukraine-Russia war. There are so many sources out there, almost all from Turkey and Turks themselves, interviews and articles documenting the horrific crimes that they have committed. When I filed a petition to the International International Criminal Court, almost all the sources we included in our submission came from Turkey themselves. And that petition was about ethnic cleansing. It was an accusation against Turkey for ethnic cleansing. When it comes to the acquisition of land of the displaced, again, Turkey doesn't hide its objective. It's there in black and white. Their property commission is there to acquire legally the title to property of the displaced. And they even tally up what percentage they have acquired. They stopped making this information public in December 2009, by which point they had already acquired 3.4 square meters of displaced property legally. This tells us that they know the occupation and its administration are not lawful. They're in violation of multiple laws and are still committing crimes. Those crimes which Glerho kindly set out, the law is clear. The crimes are being committed under the laws that civilized nations sign up to. So a next step, in my opinion, should be to document all the existing evidence and hold Turkey to account. Hold Turkey and all the individual criminals accountable for what they have done, but also to inform the world of what has happened in Cyprus. Because very few know what has happened in Cyprus, and as highlighted by my submission to the International Criminal Court, a lot of the information that is public at the moment comes from Turkey itself. So as of the displaced, and I'm glad to have heard Nikki also mention this, displacement is part of the crime of ethnic cleansing. What is displacement? Displacement is the cleansing of an area of a particular group, such as an ethnic or religious group. So if we apply that to Cyprus, who are the displaced? Mainly those of Greek ethnicity, mostly Christians and some Jews. And what of the new demographics that Turkey is creating in the occupied areas? The new demographics are Turkish ethnicity, all Turkish-speaking individuals, and of Muslim religion. Together with displacement and importation of populations, there has also been the eradication of the Greek and Christian heritage of Cyprus. So when you look at what has in fact been destroyed, and this is very well documented, they are churches, they are Christian cemeteries, the Greek language, the Greek names of streets and villages and towns have all suddenly been replaced by super mosques, which are not traditional in Cyprus, by Turkish names, including one street, Kennedy Avenue in Famagusta, was renamed after a Turkish general, and insultingly on the very day, JFK Day. There are also institutions in the occupied area which are labeled as universities, but in fact just simply indoctrinate their students with the revisionist history of Turkey. Roads and infrastructure is being built at a fast pace in the occupied area, and also, more importantly, on the land of the displaced, and unfortunately financed by, amongst others, the European Commission. Now, Gladhos took us through a lot of the legal framework, but it's important to note that the law is clear. In an occupied area, the infrastructure should not be developed. Roads should not be built beyond what is absolutely necessary. And so, in fact, what is going on is something that's not permitted under laws which govern occupation, but it's another concession that the Republic of Cyprus has seemingly made without a fight, allowing the European Union to have a presence in the occupied areas and to provide financial assistance to the occupation regime itself. So what of the forcibly displaced? Those who, for example, go to the property commission, the Turkish property commission that I mentioned, sign a statement that they voluntarily abandoned their properties. And this is just one example of how Turkey is building up their revisionist version of history, which, so those who go to the property commission either do not consider it significant or simply do not challenge. But make no mistake, no refugee or internally displaced person voluntarily abandoned their lands and their homes. They fled for their lives from the invading Turkish military, which has been allowed to occupy the northern areas for 50 years now. In terms of what is available, what effective routes are there for these internally displaced persons and refugees, there are very few. So, for example, in terms of remedies, one remedy for compensation for loss of use has been blocked off by the European Court of Human Rights, and victims have instead been redirected to the occupier for justice, to their property commission. And I've heard before the analogy being made that it's as if you're sending a rape victim to their own rapist to obtain justice. Other legal routes exist, for example, the case of Armostoli's and Arams, but that is a more complicated route, and it's not an easy one to follow without assistance. In terms of the assistance that displaced persons have obtained, it's not been forthcoming. For example, the land registry in the Republic of Cyprus is not a truly public record as is the one in England. So even those trying to assist the displaced are finding it difficult to identify those who are the real owners of property, which is being advertised for sale. And at the moment, something that we're working on is the fact that there is property for sale in the occupied areas on Rightmove. But identifying the owners is made more difficult because we don't have access to identify who they are. Assistance also from the financial sense, property and land prices in Cyprus has rocketed since 1974, and many people have benefited from that. But the displaced, they're not able to do this. And there is no sufficient government program to provide financial assistance or to ensure that the only option for those in desperate economic need is not to sell their property to Turkey at a fraction of its true cost. Another aspect where the displaced and the refugees have not had the support and the implementation of their rights effectively is their voice. As many of the speakers that have already spoken, many refugees and their descendants do not have the right to vote because they're unable to fulfill the requirement of 6 months residency in the Republic of Cyprus. Now that in itself tells you something. How can a refugee or a refugee in particular who has no home, whose home is in the occupied area, afford to move to Cyprus, live here for 6 months in order to obtain the right to vote? So they weren't able to vote in the last referendum on the Annan Plan, and they cannot select, therefore, at the moment, who represents them in the negotiations to find a settlement, which will in effect determine whether they get to return home or not. In a globalized world where citizens of countries are constantly moving, it's important that they're allowed to carry their right to vote with them. After all, as we can see tonight, the greatest ambassadors of any country are in fact the diaspora. And it's encouraging to see that our campaign at Lobby for Cyprus is gaining international support. And finally, as to returning home, this was definitely not a possibility for all in the Annan Plan. And the current psychological warfare that's been played out in Famagusta for an area named Varosha, but with no official demarcation, is creating a situation where only those of that small part of Famagusta labeled as Varosha will be allowed to return. And on that point, as to where Varosha actually is, we have been continuing our research on this to identify exactly what Varosha is. There is no official map. It does not appear in the land registry of the Republic of Cyprus. There is no map attached to the UN Security Council that first gives this name. But what we do know is that Varosha will most definitely exclude the port of Famagusta. And those of you following the news will have seen many recent news reports about the opening of the port by Turkey, firstly as a military base, and secondly for commercial use. And also, what of Gerinya? I remember as a child chanting on demonstrations, "Τα σύνορα μας είναι Gerinya," our boundaries are Gerinya. So what happened? Why are we going to stop beyond Gerinya? Why should we? And the culprit for restricting the right to return is quite simple. It's the bizonal, bicommunal federation. As Philip said, when has Cyprus ever been just about two communities or two religions or two ethnicities? Not in the 1950s, not in the 1960s, and not in 1974, and most certainly not now. It's a falsehood. It's a falsehood that was created by the British under their infamous divide and rule, which was replicated across the British Empire and whose impact of former colonization is still being felt across the world today, including in Cyprus. And when you talk about bizonal, bicommunal, two different communities, does that notion of two communities remind you of anything? Because it should. It should remind you of segregation. A bizonal, bicommunal federation will do nothing more than legalize the segregation that has been maintained so far. It is plain and simple apartheid, which is not surprising to then find that the main key players in this issue have not ratified the United Nations Convention on Apartheid. So it is time that we called it as it is and resisted the pressure for us to accept making anyone a second-class citizen in Cyprus. Only then will we have a Republic of Cyprus that is based on the rule of law, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and democracy of one person, one vote. Only then can we guarantee the right of return for all displaced persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Theodora. Thank you, Clearche. A lot has been encompassed in these two presentations, and I think there are several areas that I want to ask both Mark and Baroness. Mark, as a human rights lawyer, why isn't the rule of law implemented?
Well, I think it's realpolitik. No one but a moron in a hurry would suggest that the displaced haven't suffered grievously crimes in international law. And there has to be a political will that goes with it. And it's pellucidly clear, I think, that any settlement will be political and achieved by some kind of political fix. I think Theodora mentioned that, and the anti-penultimate speaker also referenced it. And I'd like to just perhaps say something briefly about the democratic deficit amongst the 170,000 displaced persons and their lineal descendants. They've suffered hardships, deprivations, they've had to make new lives, often in new countries. And so perhaps their democratic rights were not at the forefront of their mind as they were making those new lives as refugees. But as a human rights lawyer, but also as an eminent person designated by the Commonwealth Secretariat to observe elections and plebiscites in the Commonwealth, it does seem to me that over the 50 years since this injustice began, that international law has moved in favour of the displaced persons in Cyprus being able to vote in plebiscites. And I'd like to talk about it in two parts, really. One, in relation to any referendum like the Annan plan that failed so many years ago, but because obviously that engages directly rights of the displaced. But also, there is going to be a political fix at some point, and that political fix, many of the displaced people do not have a voice in that. They are not able to vote, they are not able to express their democratic will, and I think that's a real problem. And the law has changed, and it's important to notice that in the 1990s, the law started to recognize that displaced persons had rights, even in general elections. So Bosnia-Herzegovina was one, Rwanda in 1994, even in Colombia, the internal conflict where there were displaced persons led to displaced people being allowed to vote. More recently, we've seen it in Iraq with overseas refugees, Afghanistan, overseas refugees in 2018, 2019, Syrian refugees being entitled to vote. And beyond that, many EU countries, France, Italy, for example, allow expatriates to vote for and take part in their political process. Historically, many countries didn't because it was a national basis, and the practical realities of doing the checks, getting the ballot papers securely to different locations were in the 1950s, when many of these constitutions, and early 1960s problematic. You know, people literally came by boat. That isn't the case anymore, and therefore the inconvenience balance has changed. And I think in international law, there's a clear case that displaced persons and their lineal descendants have a right to vote, particularly on any settlement plan, because it affects their right to family life, including where they live, the right to property, including that which has been seized unlawfully, and their religious and cultural roots as well. And as a consequence of that, I think it's important for the diaspora, the refugees, to coalesce around a political solution which has their interests at the center of it. And it seems to me that the first part of that is ensuring that they have a right to vote in civil elections in Cyprus, but more particularly, if they don't get the right to vote in any political solution, then I think that would be subject to challenge and successful challenge. So I think it is important for people in this room and people in a similar position to you all to coalesce around a form of words, a specific understanding, because too many times have people got individuals within the diaspora and otherwise engaged in a futile debate about particular kinds of wording. Put forward your wording, put forward your claim to your democratic rights. There is a democratic deficit, and hopefully people will recognize it and include your voices.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. I'm sure all the refugees and the displaced here understand that they do have rights, but they've never been able to find the route and the way to actually get them. And we've been banging on the door of our government in order to ask them time and time again. I think it's the first time that we've managed to have some form of a hearing, basically. And I would like to thank the President of the Republic of Cyprus, who kindly, I've had 2 meetings with him and discussed this matter. And now it's on the table with the Director of the Services of Overseas, Cypriots, who is now going to set up a committee to look at it. But what I need, well, I'm saying I need, we need in the diaspora, we need to unite and demand our rights. And that's why I call upon all the refugee associations to stand firm and support this. It's only with the people, the masses, that we can achieve this. Yeah.
Theo, I think this is absolutely right. I think, though, that Lobby needs to commission an independent KC, for example, or someone with constitutional law experience to actually draft what it is that you want as a group. Only in that way, if you've got hard words, are you going to be able to move the legislative dial on this, I think. I don't know what you think.
Well, I just want to just add to that. The only problem we have in Cyprus is our political parties. I'll leave that to everybody to think about it and why I'm saying that.
Isn't that a universal problem?
It is, yes. Lady Nicholson.
I'm a politician, so I'm in no way supporting more work for the lawyers. Because what then happens is it just goes round and round and round in circles, much too high up, far away from ordinary people, and actually nothing actually happens. I say because I gave evidence in the Supreme Constitutional Court in Baghdad against Saddam Hussein's people. Now, to set that sort of thing up cost a fortune, an absolute huge, ginormous thing. The only people who could do it are the USA. I don't think any other nation would have pulled together to actually get that going. It was such a massive effort. I went and gave evidence there twice against 2 of Saddam's big crimes. But also, coming from the British Parliament, I tend to think the other way around. I tend to think about the ordinary citizen on the ground. And when I chaired a committee on post-conflict reparation, particularly for women, in fact, we strongly recommended, a select committee in the House of Lords, we strongly recommended that rather than send everything to some undisclosed court which is too far away and pretending that something can get done, which means about 20 or 25 years' time, one person may be found guilty, and he's probably some ancient, decrepit dictator who by that time is nearly dead anyway. What we suggested was it's very hard indeed to get local justice. Why? Because people are scared of sitting on the bench, they're scared of giving the judgments, they're frightened, things may happen, and they may be right, things may happen if they make a judgment. But if you just go up a level, and you have regional criminal courts, for example, I know of no victim of these types of horrors, of crimes against humanity of different varieties, who are ever satisfied unless they've had a day in court. So what we should do is, I think, look further down and try to get every person who's been harmed in this way to have their own trial, to be in court, to be able to give the evidence, to get it on the record, and that is a feasible thing to do. Instead of which everybody talks about, treaties here, there, and everywhere, Amsterdam, getting it off somewhere else, but what happens is nothing. And that's terrific for the lawyers, but alas, it doesn't help the citizen.
We quite like criminal prosecutions
and we,
too.
in the British Parliament, with the Magna Carta behind us, we care about the individual citizen. And I've discovered in all my work with refugees everywhere, which is extensive, that the individuals need a trial. Everyone needs to have their voice heard. They need to have their story written, and they need the society in which they live to say, yes, this was wrong. And they may not then get the answer they're seeking. They may not then get everything back again. They may not get reparation. They may not have got their family restored. People would have been killed. Awful things would have happened. But justice has been done. In a sense, people have heard. Their own community has heard. And above that, other people have heard. I think that's something one could look at further down the line in terms of rather than just high up, high up, high up. Because really, that happens so rarely to satisfy people. What people need is to be heard and to be respected and people agree, yes, we can't repair the past, we wish we could, but you're quite right, it certainly shouldn't have happened.
Thank you. I just have one more question before I put it to the floor. Last year when I was at the PSECA conference, the World PSECA conference, we were with some senators and congressmen having breakfast. And it was the time when obviously Famagusta, we saw the incidents happening in Famagusta. I asked the senator, Senator, what is the purpose of having UN resolutions when you can't implement them?
Well, I think that's my point about getting too high up the ladder. And as you think you're going to get something going, such as what happened in Baghdad, for example, try something a little bit lower and get that done, and then build up and build up and build up. I absolutely agree with you. Now, of course, Cyprus has a tremendous resource in the European Parliament and in the Council of Europe, two huge resources. I mean, the real problem with the UN is it has no court, so people can't try against it anyway. You merely rely on the Security Council listening to you. But actually, those two bodies, those two European bodies, have courts of law and have the capacity. I sat as First Vice President of the Committee of Foreign Affairs, Human Rights and Common Defence and Security Policy for a decade in Brussels. Indeed, I was there with the 2004 huge effort by Brussels and by the UN together to make a marriage, as it were, and to give you resolution. And the tragedy was that didn't go through the very, very last minute. Huge tragedy. But there's nothing against trying again. These are the strong places which believe in human rights, in common defence and security policy, and in the rule of law. There's not many other places that do. So we should use those two sources more than anything else, in my opinion. Try again with the 2004 argument, which by now would have moved on a very long way. Pick that up again. Try to get the General Secretary, who's rather a good one at the moment. I mean, Kofi Annan I worked with, lovely guy, but we have a very nice one at the moment. He hasn't gone yet. And then the European Commission is extremely strong all the time, working on enlargement, working on common defence and security policy, and working on the rule of law and human rights. These are these strongest bodies you could possibly find almost in the history of man. And I think for the moment, while they're there, we should go straight back there and begin again.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with much of that, but I do think that until the pressure of the diaspora of refugees is heard in its political voice, then those pressures are unlikely to come forward. And there is likely to be, within any settlement, some kind of truth and reconciliation process.
Strasbourg and under
yeah, I totally agree with you, but it needs the Cypriot government and other governments to actually feel that that is important.
But I mean, the other great strength, surely, of Cyprus is the Five Eyes. So those who don't come under Brussels and Strasbourg actually come with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. So really, Cyprus has this jewel of strength in her hand. And I don't quite know why actually it's not winning.
Right, let's have a couple of questions. Leonida?
What is, in your view, the reason why successive British governments, Labour and Conservative, never came out clearly against what happened in Cyprus, against the Turkish invasion, against all these violations that we spent 3 hours talking about. What is the real reason why neither Conservative nor Labour governments ever had a clear policy on these tragic issues? Since the first 2 decades, it was the policy of the Foreign Office of equal footing. Then we heard Mrs. Thatcher that in Kuwait it was an invasion, in Cyprus it was an intervention. Then during Labour government, we have seen no action or any movement to condemn Turkey in whatever crimes you have described today. I would like your comments, please.
Well, since it hasn't happened, why waste more energy in trying to make it happen? Find something more constructive, more positive. I've already given you 3 major places where Cyprus has a jewel in her hand, both the Five Eyes and Strasbourg and Brussels. So forget about the things that didn't work. Get on with the ones that will.
Yes. I think there's also an issue around security. It shouldn't go unnoticed that Cyprus is a permanently based aircraft carrier for the Five Eyes, and that Turkey is a listening post originally for the old Soviet bloc and now for the whole of the Middle East, for the US. So there's got to be some pretty cogent reasons to disturb the equilibrium that's in place at the moment. Maybe it's an unhappy equilibrium, but it's an equilibrium.
But I think my point is the more you just look back, and yes, tonight is a place of mourning, looking back at horrors that happened. But don't go on like that. Look forward, look something constructive, and make things happen. I don't know why the Labour Party or the Conservative Party didn't do it. I wasn't around at the time. Maybe I was sitting in Brussels fighting for you there. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is what happens next.
I agree.
Well, I think I'm going to put it to a close because 9 o'clock we were supposed to stop. I'd like to thank Lady Nicholson, thank you very much, and Mark Stevens, thank you very much on the panel. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who has attended tonight. We are here. Theodora, good night. Well, I'd like to thank His Excellency the High Commissioner and all the staff here, especially Vasiliki, wherever she is. She helped me so much. And please, we have some lovely Greek food. Thank you.